On July 21st, 2019, we flew from Tel Aviv to Warsaw. It took about 3.5 hours. There's lots to see in Warsaw, and we spent the entire next day at the Polin Museum, which is dedicated to 1,000 years of Jewish history in Poland. At the museum, we learned that July 22nd was the 77th anniversary of the day the Germans first started to liquidate the Warsaw Ghetto and deport the Jews to Treblinka. We discovered that a memorial was being planned, so we went to check it out. Today we begin the first leg of our shtetl day. Opatov is first stop.
Bars and police and security.
Oh yes. And there it is. Opt is about a 2.5-hour drive from Warsaw. Here's what the countryside looks like. Very similar to Ontario. At last we arrived.
There's that toll bridge. There are the Frajman brothers jumping on top of the horses. You come back and pay your toll. There's the wall of the city.
We passed the gate and the old city walls. Now we're driving into the town over ancient cobblestone road.
So after a very long car trip, we finally arrived in Opatov, and here is the town square that we've seen in the Mayor July painting.
Opt has one of the largest market squares of any small town in Poland.
And now, let's begin exploring.
We were helped enormously by the hand-drawn maps of Jewish Opt that Mayor Kirschenblatt had included in his book, They Called Me Mayor July. The main Jewish street in Opatov was called the Breite Gasse. Here's our tour guide trying to get oriented. The only Jewish building still standing on the Breite Gasse is the upper base medrash. If you look carefully, you can see the Magen David in the brickwork by the windows. It's probably the place where this young yeshiva bacher went to learn each day. This building was once occupied by Jews. We know this because the indentation of the mezuzah can still be seen on the door. The synagogue stood at 20 Breite Gasse, and the lower base medrash stood beside it at number 21. Today this new building occupies its space. Compare the fence in Mayor Kirschenblatt's painting of the shul with the fence that remains today. I'm sure this is the spot. This neighborhood later became the site of the Opatov ghetto in 1940, where about 10,000 Jews were confined to just a couple of streets. Here are the remains of another old building, but this address isn't on the Kirchenblatt map, so I don't know what stood here. Here is some old pavement. This alleyway led from the main square to the Jewish street. People walk to and from shul down this path. Kinda neat. The Polish name for Breitegasse was Cherokee. According to the Mayor July map, this is where the jail stood, so close to the shul. Now we're walking out of the city towards the Jewish cemetery. Note the Soviet-style housing built after the war. This is the entrance to the Jewish cemetery. It's worth noting that every memorial we came across in Poland was built and paid for by people outside of the country. There seemed to be no effort on the part of the Poles to remember their Jews. So here is where the Jewish cemetery once stood, and presumably we have many, many relatives buried under here. But the Germans destroyed everything in 1941, put the Jews of Opt into a ghetto, and then sent them all to Treblinka. But we can safely assume that we have generations of Frajmans buried here. Not only are there members of our family buried here, but beginning in January 1942, the SS conducted mass shooting actions at the Jewish cemetery in Opatov, where the bodies of the ghetto victims were also buried by the hundreds. There is no marker remembering this atrocity, nor is there any indication where this mass grave is located. I read about it in Wikipedia. At the end of the park, way out of the way, our guide found the few last remaining tombstones that had once stood in the cemetery. There were once thousands, and now just a handful are left. Crazy to think that Mayor Kirchenblatt once painted a picture of a wedding that took place in this cemetery. The town hall has remained pretty much intact. Here is the last known address of the Frajmans, number 2 Rheineck. I doubt this was the original building. Family would have walked out of the house, and look, they would be facing the well. There's the town hall, and here is the town square. Thank you, Opatov, for giving us blueberry buns. And thank you to our great-grandparents for moving the family to Palestine before the First World War so that we could be alive today to tell this story. Our day wasn't over yet. We still had 2 more towns to visit. Nova Slupia, my friend Josie's town, and Nowy Dwór Mazowiecki, Mardo's hometown.
This is the map of what we call Slupia, and that blue line is probably the river where the Kaplanskis did their laundry. And we don't know where the homes were, but this is the town today, 2019.
This pretty little town is Nowy Dwór, but you can be sure there is a dark side to this place. Note how this sign is in English, not in Polish. This is all that remains of the Jewish cemetery. All three towns have a sad, empty feel to them. Last day in Poland, we took a walking tour of the synagogue that stands today, along with its kosher store, the remainder of the Warsaw Ghetto, and the Jewish cemetery. For reasons unclear, the Jewish cemetery of Warsaw was never destroyed during the war. After lunch, we went to visit the reconstructed old town of Warsaw. As you know, Warsaw was completely destroyed during the war, and this new old town looks like Epcot Center. Check out the souvenirs for sale there. When will they ever learn? This video was made in honor of your 94th birthday. I wanted to take you back to Opt because you're always talking about it. The whole thing came out a little darker and gloomier than I had intended, but that's what happens when you go to visit Poland. Anyway, I hope you liked it. Wishing you a happy birthday and see you soon.